Give bipartisan approach a chance was the call Kenyan President William Ruto made on the opposition Azimio la Umoja One Kenya. This was Ruto's first since nationwide protests began over the high cost of living and alleged election irregularities.
Country's image and history in the League of Modern Nations has been at stake in the last 2 weeks. The country's economy has been hit hard at a time when my administration is doing everything possible to salvage the economy from the deep hole where we found it. The violence, chaos, and disorder continues to distract our national focus of economic transformation. 3 Kenyans, among them a police officer, have lost their lives in the protest. More than 400 Kenyans, including at least 60 security officers, have been injured. I urge my brother Raila Odinga and the opposition to call off the demonstrations and to give this bipartisan approach a chance for us to take the country.
Shortly after this appeal on Sunday, opposition leader Raila Odinga announced the temporary suspension of anti-government protests, stating that he was prepared for talks. Take a listen.
In view of the foregoing, we stand down our demonstrations for Monday, that is tomorrow, April 3rd, 2023. 6. But in doing so, we want to emphasize that the right to assemble, to demonstrate, petition, and to speak are ironclad as provided for in our Constitution. 7, therefore, we reserve our rights to call for demonstrations should this process not bear fruit. Should there be no meaningful engagement or response from Hon Ruto to our counter-offer, we resolve to resume our demonstrations after 1 week.
In his address, Ruto condemned the grave acts of lawlessness, widespread violence, looting and invasion of private property that occurred during the protests and urged Odinga to call them off. 3 people died and over 400 injured since the protests began. Ruto expressed willingness to engage in this bipartisan electoral reform, a key demand of the opposition. Odinga, however, cautioned that protests would resume if the government failed to address the issues at hand. I am Kemini Amano, and you're welcome to The Square. Joining our gathering today are Richard Bosire. He's a political analyst joining us from Nairobi-Kenya. Tele Nzomo is programs officer at Siasa Place, also in Nairobi-Kenya. Gentlemen, you're welcome to The Square. Now, I'm going to start with you, Richard. Is this how you expected things to wrap up, even if it's temporarily so?
Thank you for inviting me here. Yesterday's event is not a surprise to many Kenyans because it's like history is repeating itself. You remember in 1997, we had a similar situation where there was the opposition was fighting with the government in terms of reconstitution of the Electoral Commission. Same thing happened in 2018 when over the disputed presidential election, the then former President Uhuru Kenyatta agreed to shake hands with Raila Odinga, and then they formed what we call BBI. And the same thing that's happening right now, where Ruto and Raila have started engaging in dialogue to see how they can mend fences over the disputed presidential election. So it's like history is repeating itself, and this is the Kenyan democracy. It's not a surprise to many of us. So we are expecting them to agree finally.
I see. I'll take it to Tele now. Tele, were there any surprises in there? And should or could the president have spoken earlier than he did?
I think I agree with Richard when he said that there wasn't any surprises. This is basically history repeating itself. We've seen it over and over again. It's more about politicians and their interests. Yeah, they come out and they start all this chaos, and at the end of the day, they meet in boardrooms and agree on a way forward that in many cases isn't in the interest of the Kenyans, but in their own selfish interests. As far as whether the president should have spoken earlier, I think that yes, he should have come out earlier to reduce the chaos and to reduce the destruction of property and the lives that we saw. But I think he was also playing a political game. You know, he did not. It was a question of negotiations between the president and the former prime minister. So I think he was just playing a political game on his end.
I see. Richard, all this while, I beg your pardon, there had been calls for dialogue. The opposition had thrown all of these to the gutters. What do you think changed this time?
You remember both the opposition and government have been facing pressure from the churches, from civil society, from Kenyans, from the international community to sit down and negotiate on how to agree on the contentious issues. You remember, even before the opposition demo started, the President, William Ruto, had already proposed for the formation of the office of the opposition leader. This one is like enticing the opposition to accept their position and they enjoy government perks like allowances, address to the parliament annually, and also get government protection. So this was a proposal that was already tabled by the president. And as you saw yesterday, the opposition leader said they're not interested in joining the government. They only want their issues addressed. On top of that is the reconstitution of the IBC, which they have already agreed that they'll do it through parliamentary ways. And we expect this to be concluded in the next, like 1 month, because today already the president has met his parliamentary leadership of Kenya Kwanza from the Senate and the National Assembly at State House today, and they have already agreed on the framework. For now, they'll engage the opposition. So we're expecting by tomorrow to see official communication from State House, Kenya. For now, they'll approach this issue. So, but as the opposition leader said, they are giving the government 1 week before they can conclude if they'll go back to the streets. But I don't think that will happen because there's already an ongoing process on how to start the negotiation.
I see. Tele, I want us to look at the addresses of both leaders. We first heard from President Ruto. Tell me what you gleaned from the two of them. Do they sound like they're on the same page?
I think, yes, they're on the same page. Obviously, these addresses would have been made after negotiations, after talking to each other. It seems as though the major issue coming out of this was the IEBC, not even the issue of the cost of living or the economy, but majorly the IEBC and how they're going to move forward in creating the new team. This is actually something that we saw heading into the 2017 elections, where at the time the opposition was called COD, and Raila was leading demonstrations, and they came to an agreement with the then President Uhuru Kenyatta on forming the IEBC and actually forming it through a parliamentary team. That's when we had the team now that was being chaired by Senator Kiraitu Murungi at the time and Senator James Orengo at the time. So it's something that we've seen. It seems as though the IEBC is the major issue coming out of this, and I think the two are on the same page by the time they came to speak.
I see. I want to hear from you, Richard. What are your thoughts about that?
I agree with Nzomo that the reconstitution of the Electoral Commission is now the topmost issue that's being talked about by the opposition and the government. The cost of living and the other issues have been relegated for now. So we're expecting the two sides to focus more on the preparations for the next election instead of focusing on the major issues that are affecting Kenya. But also, I tend to say that formation of the IEBC is a crucial matter, which needs to be fast-tracked because at the moment, we don't have a functional IEBC. And so far, last week, we had a member of parliament who died. So we cannot even hold that by-election because the IEBC is not fully constituted. So it's a matter which should be fast-tracked, and so that we can have an electoral body which is capable of holding elections in Kenya anytime.
Gentlemen, I just want to share with you a few of the things that I noted that gives me concern that perhaps this is headed for a deadlock. To start with, the president notes that the elections were free and fair. The opposition, on the other hand, in their own address, reiterates the fact that there was electoral injustice. On the other hand, we also have the president calling for a bipartisan parliamentary committee to look into the IEBC concerns raised by the opposition. But in the address of the opposition, they talk not only about the IEBC, they talk not only about a parliamentary committee, they actually are also calling for external arbitrators to be included to look at the IEBC issue and the other ones that they have raised. It doesn't look like, they are on the same page when it comes to it, does it, Richard?
Definitely, we have headliners from both camps, and we're expecting them to issue different demands. You've already seen the president state that the matter of the 2022 election is done and dusted, that there is a government which was validly elected, and the Supreme Court validated the election. And the opposition is saying that they don't recognize the election. So they are demanding for the opening of the servers. But this matter, I can promise you, will be dealt with, and we are not going to go back there. The major issue will be the formation of the IEBC and how the opposition will be scattered or they'll be favored in parliament. For example, in the formation of the office of the opposition leader, which the president has already said he wants that to be formed so that the opposition can play its role in counter-checking the government. So I can promise you that in the next 1 month, there will be a truce on the matter which is beforehand. And I think the headliners from both camps will drop their demands. And the president and the official opposition leader, Raila Odinga, will agree on the contentious issues. That one I can promise you.
I see. Tele, those things that I have identified, do they come across to you as a source for concern going into this dialogue?
Not at all. As we've said, we've seen this happen over and over again. You remember after the 2017 elections, when Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga agreed to move forward with the VBI, Uhuru Kenyatta had said that the election was free and fair. Raila Odinga was saying the election was contentious, yet they still agreed on a way to move forward. So these are issues that we've seen before. They will obviously Raila will maintain his stance that he won the election last time. President Ruto will also maintain his stance that the elections were free and fair. But moving forward, they'll have an agreement. They'll come to an agreement in the formation of the team, of the IEBC team.
I see, but the difference is that there was a common place on the issue. There was a common agreement on the issue at the time between Kenyatta and Odinga. In this case, there does not seem to be a common agreement on the issue to be dialogued upon. Wouldn't you say so?
I think the issue is just the formation of the IEBC. I think that's where Raila Odinga's biggest issue is. They want to have a big say on who sits in the IEBC commission, and I think that is something that they will agree on. We've seen it happen over and over and over again, as I think Richard had mentioned earlier. So they'll come to an agreement as Richard said, in the next 1 month. Yeah, I think they'll come to an agreement and a way forward.
Then it brings the question of where does that leave the cost of living concerns that brought the masses to the streets to support Raila Odinga. Richard, I see you smiling. Maybe you can take off on that bit of the conversation for us.
Kevin, what I can tell you is that there's a saying we say that if you can't fix your politics, you can't fix the economy. And I believe you agree with me. If we have political wrangles in Kenya, there's no way the economy will improve. There's no way the cost of living will go down. So, Mr. President William Ruto and Raila Odinga, if they agree on their contentious issues and leave the matter of the last general election and focus on uniting Kenyans, the economy will improve and eventually the cost of living will come down. This is a matter which cannot come down drastically. And because if the opposition and government continue to fight, if they don't focus on the agenda they promised to Kenyans, if they don't focus on uniting Kenyans, there's no way the economy will improve. And that's happening all over the world. If there's no political stability in a country, you cannot even attract foreign investment. So for the last 2 weeks, Kenya has suffered heavily in terms of the economy because even tourists have cancelled their bookings in Kenya. We have seen a number of flights being cancelled, and this was not good for the economy. So I expect when this is done, the Kenyan economy will stabilize and Kenyans will feel progress later.
I see. Tele, what would this mean to, the masses who came out because of the high cost of living crisis at this point? Would this mean anything to them?
I think that they might feel a bit let down because, as we've mentioned, I think the issue of the cost of living seems to have been relegated. It's not an issue, obviously, that can be solved immediately. It's something that will take time, trying to fix the economic situations that we have. But I do think, yes, they will feel a little bit let down because things will still be tough. We also have to remember that Raila Odinga himself has quite a number of members of parliament who can help solve some of these issues. For example, by trying to reduce taxes. That happens at the National Assembly. It doesn't happen in the executive. So I think Kenyans, will feel let down, but I think it's also important for us as Kenyans to put pressure on government to now solve these issues. We can't just sit back and say, okay, now they're looking at IEBC issues alone. We have to be the ones to put pressure on them to say the economy is still a problem. We're not seeing anything changing, and we want both of you from the different political sides to come together and fix this issue.
For those that will be aggrieved because of this handshake agreement to dialogue between Odinga and the incumbent president William Ruto, how can those who are arbitrating the situation right now carry them along so that the grassroots is not disillusioned and perhaps continuing to allow the division to fester, the concerns about the high cost of living to fester, but they are carried along in this peacemaking process? Tele.
I think that the arbitrators on the issue of the economy, I don't think that there's anything these two sides are going to do. I think moving forward, what they will concentrate on is the IEBC. But trying to solve the economic issue, we have to push for a way from the legislature, especially because they are the ones who, deal with issues of taxes. So push them to reduce taxes on their end, and also push for the government to reduce the amount of borrowing that they're doing, the amount of spending that they're doing. But I don't think this is an issue that will be dealt with in dialogue between Raila Odinga and William Ruto.
I see. Richard, what do you think? How do you think that, they can help those who came out in their numbers because of the high cost of living? However, it doesn't seem to be on the table. And as you said, you fix the politics, you fix the economy. How do they make people understand that?
I think it's not only the work of the opposition to pressure the government to bring down the cost of living. We have the civil society. Kenya has one of the most, let's say, active civil society in Africa. But for the last 10 years, the civil society has been dormant. So we need to pressure the civil society, the media, the churches, to put the government on toes to work hard and reduce the cost of living, because the opposition cannot do that work alone. So as they agree on the contentious issues, especially on the matters of the Electoral Commission, other parties should now wake up and do their role. Like the civil society in Kenya has been dormant, so we want to see them out talking to the government, pressurizing the opposition also to put measures and legislation that will help Kenyans to reduce the cost of living.
I see. I want us to take our very first break, and perhaps the only one. But when we come back, let's delve in deeper into the aftermath of, you know, the demonstrations. They've been called off, but we know that it's left in its trail, a long list of destruction of people's properties, businesses. Let's talk cleanup and recovery when we return. Welcome back to The Square. We're discussing events happening in Kenya after the opposition leader called off their planned demonstrations temporarily, at least for a week, pending dialogue with, the sitting government of President William Ruto. Still with me, Tele Nzomo. He is the programs officer at Siasa place in Nairobi, Kenya. We also have Richard Bosire. He's a political analyst also in Nairobi, Kenya. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience and your insights on the subject matter. But let's quickly just wrap it up on issues around this bipartisan committee. Earlier on, I was telling you that the opposition had asked for external hands to be involved in this. How important do you think it will be, Richard, if external hands are included? Should external hands even be included in the first place?
Yes, Kevin, I think external parties should be included in this dialogue because remember the 2010 constitution, which was very, very hard to get in Kenya, was achieved because of the involvement of other parties like the churches, civil society, the Law Society of Kenya, the workers' unions, all other trade unions were involved in the formation of the new constitution. So I think other parties should also be included in this dialogue between the government and the opposition if we want to achieve results that are acceptable all over. Because if you only deal with the opposition and the government, Kenyans will be left out and they'll not be happy at the end of it. So churches, civil society, and other trade unions should put pressure on government and the opposition to be included in the talks so that they can also propose their ideas on how to tame the rising cost of living in Kenya, how to end police brutality. You witnessed how the demos were happening in Nairobi, especially, and Kisumu. Police were very brutal. In fact, journalists were the most affected. Some of them were injured, were targeted by the police. So these are issues which should be dealt with immediately so that going forward we don't witness such incidents again. In fact, the media fraternities are planning to have a protest on Wednesday in Kenya to protest against police brutality. I think these are matters, weighty matters, which should be considered in the dialogue.
Very well. Now, Tele, we know that the opposition said they were calling off their demonstrations for a week pending the dialogue. But is that not too short a time? Is that enough time for something meaningful to be done?
I think I suspect the dialogue has been taking place all through, that they have been speaking to each other behind the scenes. I know that we have seen religious leaders approaching both sides of the divide. I know that the international community must have also been involved in trying to get these people to the table. So I don't think a week is long when you consider the fact that they must have already been talking, trying to find a way here. And right now, I think the contentious issue, as we said, is the IEBC. So now I think they're just going to come to an agreement on how they can select the team. So I don't think a week is too long.
I see. What are the ways that do you think this could go if we were to look into the future? Richard?
I think if they agree on the formation of the IEBC, then they will leave the government to fix the issue of cost of living. So I think now the ball is in President William Ruto's court, because if they deal with the matter of politics on the IBC formation, the president will now be left alone to deal with the cost of living and other contentious issues. So it's good for the president to involve all other parties to help him achieve his agenda, which he promised Kenyans to fix the economy, which is the most important issue right now in Kenya. The economy is number one. Issue number two is the economy. Issue number three is the economy. I think the issue of IBC should be dealt with as soon as possible so that we can move forward and deal with the most pressing issue, which is affecting most Kenyans. Because in the next 5 years, it's the government which will be answerable at the end of the 5 years, not the opposition. So Mr. President William Ruto has weighty issues on his hands to deal with before the next election.
I see, Tele, we know that the president was in Parliament again informing the House that they needed to form, the bipartisan committee to look into this. It was a very interesting appeal to the House. But I want to talk about the two parties that will be, in fact, the two sides, rather. Parties could confuse things. But the two sides that could be going into this dialogue. What do you expect their posturing to be in order to get to, a decision as soon as possible?
I think Richard had mentioned this earlier, that on both teams you're going to expect there to be hardliners. You're going to expect people who who do not want to come to an agreement, or who are going to drive a hard bargain. And those hardliners are usually the people who cause the biggest challenges during such dialogues. They have very they have very tough stances on how they should work. We have seen the deputy president, for example, of this country suggesting that William Ruto should not work with Raila Odinga, that Raila Odinga is not welcomed in government. And we've had that statement also coming from other politicians. So it's going to be a very challenging, challenging dialogue. But I do believe that at the end of the day, both William Ruto and Raila Odinga are going to want to have a solution. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on them to come to a solution, as I said, from religious groups, from civil society, from the international community. I know the international community's opinion really matters a lot to the two of them. So I expect there to be an agreement at the end of the week.
We'll see about that. But let's look at the country, Kenya. The last 2.2 weeks, or perhaps 2.5 weeks, have been very hectic for the nation. Let's consider how Kenya came out of that. Richard, what are your reflections? What would you say is the state of Kenya coming out of that on the socio-economic front, on the socio-political front? What are your reflections?
Kemi, what I can say is that Kenya will emerge stronger out of this. These are scenes which we have witnessed before. In fact, in 1997, we had clashes. They were very serious, and most people died in those hotspots. In 2007, we also had post-election violence, which was the worst in Kenya's history. But in 2022, even if the elections were disputed, we didn't see skirmishes. We saw the people were calm, and although there was tension. So I think after they agree on the contentious issues between the opposition and the government, Kenya will emerge stronger and peace will prevail, because Kenyans are not used to violence, and it's only elections which lead to violence in Kenya. Kenyans love peace and unity.
Right.
We have,
but how about now? How has the last 2 or so weeks affected the country?
What I can say in terms of the economy, of course, the country has been affected the last 2 weeks. Nairobi is the capital city of Kenya. And if you paralyze operations in Nairobi, especially the central business district, Kenya feels the heat all over. In fact, even Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, the East African region was largely affected by the skirmishes in Nairobi, because Nairobi is like the hub of East Africa. So it has affected the economy, but I can promise you that after a month or two, we will emerge stronger. And I believe that the opposition and the government will be open, transparent, and sincere in their dialogue, so that we don't witness the anarchy and chaos that was witnessed in the last 2 weeks in Nairobi, especially, and Kisumu.
I see. Tele, would you consider this a useful political process that has deepened the polity in Kenya?
Not really. I think it's just what we have been seeing over the years, as Richard mentioned, from 1997. We saw it in 2013. We saw it again in 2017. It's just our political script. We go to elections. From the elections, the loser, most of the cases, Raila Odinga, tries to they reject the results. We then start a lot of promotion on the IEBC. We start talking about how to form it, whether it should be done by parliamentary groups. So it's something that we've seen over and over again. I don't think it has deepened our politics in any sort of form. This is just Kenyan politics and how we've always done it.
But so then would you say that perhaps it's time to do away with this script that you have been recycling since 1997?
Yeah, I think we really need to do away with this script, and I think it depends on us, the people, because for so long we've given our politicians too much power. We go to the streets, in the guise of cost of living, but what we're fighting for tends to be just the interests of these politicians. So it's going to be dependent on us as Kenyans to change our attitude towards politics, towards politicians, so that we are not just simply going out and fighting or doing their bidding.
Tele, I just want to stay with you a bit longer. How can the Kenyan people take back their political power?
Well, I think they have to say that enough is enough. We have to change how we carry out our politics. We have to change this tribal nature of our politics. We have to start looking for a better way of actually choosing leaders. Yeah, well, we've seen in the past, president's advisor who comes out and tells us that when they were appointing 50 CASs, and the advisor comes and somebody mentions to him that the money that they're using to pay those CASs could have been used to pay for classrooms, and he comes and says that classrooms are not going to campaign for them. We just have to change our attitude, our mentality, and we have to ask better from our leaders and to choose better leadership.
I see. Richard, what responsibility do the leaders carry in changing this script that keeps coming back after every election?
I think the responsibility lies with Kenyan. We cannot leave politicians alone to dictate the political scenario in Kenya. We have a population of 55 million, and I'm encouraging Kenyans to wake up and be active, register as voters, turn out and vote for the leaders. If you don't turn up and vote, you elect the bad leaders. So it's up to Kenyans to be active and demand for accountability all over, from the county levels, from the national levels. So you cannot leave alone the government to fix everything and the opposition. Kenyans must also rise up and be active in terms of changing our politics, and so that we can end tribal politics and improve on governance in Kenya.
Quickly, I want us to talk about cleaning up. Part of the mess that was left behind after all of this is the crimes that were committed, and the brutality that was visited upon protesters as well. Let's start off with the crimes, and I hope we have time for the brutality. What should be the action towards making sure there's justice for those who were visited upon by these crimes, or who suffered the effect of these crimes?
Already we've seen the Director of Public Prosecution, Nurdin Haji, today. He has already dropped charges against opposition leaders who took part in the protest. Over 200 protestants who are also charged in court for assembling and taking part in legal protests have already been released. So we can say that the government has started implementing some of the demands by the opposition. So what we're expecting next is also people will demand for compensation, those who are affected by the protest. You've seen even the opposition leader, some are saying they will sue the police IG for the damages they suffered during the protest. Some of them, their cars were damaged, others were affected by police brutality, some were injured. You've seen even media people were injured, their equipment were destroyed. So we're expecting a lot of litigations and counter litigations in court after the protest. And but I can assure you that the police will be on the spotlight for how they carried out the exercise by being brutal on the media.
I see. Tele, what do you think? Is it time for the police to investigate properly those crimes that took place, or perhaps it could just be considered collateral damage?
I think the most concerning thing that we witnessed the last 2 weeks was actually, in my opinion, the behavior of the police. You know, the Kenya police are supposed to be a police service, not a police force. Unfortunately, we saw, the police being very, very, very aggressive. We saw attempts to try and say that the protests were not legitimate, or to say that they were unlawful. Yet it's every person's right to protest. I think moving forward, we need to have a conversation about our police and how they react. As we mentioned earlier, we saw journalists, unfortunately, being attacked during this protest. So I think it's going to be a big question. We need to have a very big conversation in this country about our police, how the police react to protests, how they react to these legal protests. Just today we saw Eric Omondi, a comedian, getting arrested because he was protesting in the streets because of the economy. So I think it's going to be a huge conversation about how our police works, and especially the oversight and how they can be oversighted.
Very well. Gentlemen, I just want to bring into your focus, the people who died. Who's getting them justice? How and when? Tele, if you could take that for me quickly, and then I'll move on to Richard to wrap up.
Unfortunately, we have seen these cases happen a lot of times where people have lost their lives in a lot of these political processes. We had an unfortunate story in 2017 of a young child, Baby Pendo, who died because of these protests. We never get justice for them, and unfortunately they just end up, as you said before, just being collateral damage in an attempt to get politicians what they want.
Richard, your final thoughts on this, and then we call it a show.
On my part, I expect the Kenya Human Rights Commission to rise up and demand for justice for the victims of the chaos. We lost 3 lives, 1 policeman and 2 protesters were killed during the anarchy. So we also expect the families of the 3 to demand for compensation, and also the Independent Police Oversight Authority will also be on the spotlight to demand for accountability from the police on how they handled the protest. So we're expecting a lot of suckers in the court, a lot of suckers in the media on how to handle the but the spotlight will be on the police.
I guess interesting days ahead in Kenya. We'll keep an eye on things happening there. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Your insight on the subject matter is much appreciated.
Thank you.
Tele Nzomo is a programs officer for Siasa Place in Nairobi, Kenya. And then Richard Bosire is also a political analyst in Nairobi, Kenya. We've been discussing developments in that country. We'll keep an eye on things, share with you when developments emerge. But that'll be all for our first show of this week. We hope to stay with you until Thursday. My name is Kemini Amano. If you missed the show, watch a playback on YouTube. Bye-bye for now.